So this is EOF Implementers call number 43, 24th of April, 2024. So our agenda is client updates, compiler updates, spec updates, test updates, and a list of other items. So client updates, Besu has been contributing to some of the tests, using Besu as a basis to validate the tests. Some bugs in Besu were found in the process, fix those as we get them. That's why we write tests. Next up, Marius, you want to talk about Geth?
Sure. Yeah, so we I've I'm passing all the EF validation tests, and I have still a lot of EF stack tests failing. But I think over the last week I fixed around maybe 20 or 30 bugs that we had in the implementation. And yeah, so far it's kind of progressing okay-ish, I would say. Yeah, just cracking on with the validation stuff. And it's been sometimes kind of hard to understand what the tests do. So the tests in the test repo have, except for the name, they don't really have any explanations to them. And so sometimes it was like, I don't know, most of the time it's just spent reading the raw bytecode and trying to understand what the test tries to do. So if we want to port them, or if we're porting them, it would be really nice if we could have like a good description for each test case, what it tries to achieve, so that it's easier to see what the bug is in your implementation if you fail it. Otherwise, I think the test coverage, at least for the validation, is kind of okay. There were some. One thing that I found was, I would make a lot of tests pass with some buggy implementation, and there was one test that would fail, and I would like realize it and then fix the implementation, and then all of the other tests would be passed as well. So and then there was one time where I fixed something in a wrong way, but it passed every test. So the case was if a subsection subsection is truncated, but also so we have this rule that the data size has to match the data length if you want to deploy. But what I implemented is that it matches the data length of the contract that deploys it. So the outer container basically, and that passed the test, but it's kind of wrong. So I realized at some point it's just wrong, and fixed it. Anyway, there are some, but it's also very hard to make it to create a test that tests this exact thing. Anyway,
Could you share what you did have that briefly passed?
Yes, I'll share it in the chat because I have to dig it up again, and it's hard to reasonable.
Yep, that's understandable. But if you get tests that you think that are interesting, please share them. We can always add them to the corpus. I think those are valuable, even if it's stuff that you fixed. Okay. Marius went on mute. Epsilon, anything from EVM1? Going once, going twice. Doesn't look like it.
Yeah, we have merged EOF create and TX create by now, and we have one pending fix for the rule about unreachable code sections. And otherwise, we are up to the current spec. Yeah, that's
Okay.
it.
No Nethermind, no Ethereum JS, no Aragon. So I think next is compilers. Daniel Charles, who wants to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. Yeah, I mean, I'm basically here because Epsilon told me it would be good since EOF is scheduled for considered for inclusion now to join these calls again. We still implementation-wise have the implementation of the Shanghai version of EOF, and now am wondering what the guarantees are of the Vega EOF specification actually happening, which would mean that we can allocate time to update the implementation to that version. And that's basically a date from us summarized.
Okay. Charles, anything from Viper?
No, same status.
So what level of guarantees do the two of you need before you can start implementing? What changes need to be set in stone that won't change?
Who's asking?
I'm asking for one. I'd like to know what should be what should be considered absolutely frozen and what could be discussed to be changed, if anything. What can we do to unblock compiler progress? And if that's putting a lockdown on the spec, maybe we need to do that, and what that lockdown looks like.
I think that implementing EOF from the compiler's point of view is actually kind of complicated, like maybe more complicated than the EVM implementation, because it just like works very differently. Because you have to like basically completely redo how functions are compiled. So it's not. So, I mean, if somebody needs the compiler to implement it, then like what we would need to be guaranteed is basically like the container format and some of the basic callf, basically the subroutine and call and jump instructions. But if nobody needs it, we're just gonna kind of put off productionizing it until, you know, like the day before the fork, or, you know, some reasonable time to allow for testing.
I mean, I would have quite a different perspective there. I mean, we have implemented the part for the Shanghai version of EOF, and that's sitting there, not merged, but I mean, in a state that can be revived. For us, it would be some effort to accommodate the contract creation changes. That's not entirely trivial, but also that's significant effort. But I mean, what we really want is a prognosis of the likelihood of actually there being consensus of actually doing EOF at some specific point in time, which then we would be very happy to provide an implementation for whichever version then. What we really need in the specification is the DAPN and SWAPM opcodes. That's what helps us the most. The other stuff, iterations on those, I mean, not much of that is optional, and it's well specified as it is. But I mean, minor changes around that we can accommodate because the code doesn't change that much depending on how the container format actually looks and stuff like that. But yeah, the most important thing for us is to actually know that we can assume that in some particular hard fork there will be EOF, and we are happy to way before that spend effort in providing an implementation.
Okay, that's good to hear. One of the reasons that I do want to unblock the compilers is there's been questions raised about what's going to be the net size differences, what's going to be the actual operational gas differences, if any. Is it going to be like, double, 20%, 1%? Is it going to be noise? Those are questions that really are not answered well without an actual implementation of compilers. So that's my interest in trying to unblock and get things progressing.
I mean, we have good data from the previous version of EOF that increased our metrics in both gas cost and code size. I don't think that the changes in creation and the code inspection changes will have much of an effect on any of that.
Right.
Okay, do you have benchmarks for those?
Go ahead.
Yeah, benchmarks handy that I could reference, or should I try and recreate some myself?
I mean, we did provide some data back then. I can look that up. We can revive the branch and do it again.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's relative to the version of EOF at that point in time. So it's not actually the current specification, but.
And more importantly, it's not the Verkle version of it. But that would be, I mean, that would be a starting point. I'd be happy with that to begin with. Yeah.
Yeah,
Charles?
I mean, we also have some data from the Shanghai version, and it's like we actually had code size regressions, because code sharing isn't and Viper has, I think, always had very good code size, and the issue here is that code sharing is not as good after EOF, and because of the code sharing restrictions, which is that shared code basically needs to be put in subroutines, you end up with more code size versus gas trade-offs than like in EIP 2315 world where you have the global code section.
Right. But isn't that why we introduced the changes in the stack height validations where it's a range instead of a fixed value, which allows you to then outline for various ranges?
Yes, it's better, but there's still a gas versus code side trade-off because the lower gas is to jump within a section. So if you want to outline it, then you need a call-f instead of jumping.
Okay.
I can just say that even with the previous stack validation version, we had code size improvements. With that, they will be even better.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, that's just an open question. And is there anything I can do to help unblock you on these? Let me know. Anything else for compilers before we move on to spec? Okay. Looking at the agenda, I see spec items and other items. There's some other items which are in spec items. The first spec item we need to finalize on was changing, discuss the version without the regular state change. Number 78. Pulling TX create out possibly from this revision. Adding an init code validation. Discussing return data zero padding. And some issues with EXT cost and min retain gas. And I thought I put in a request for, I must not have put it in the right place, to discuss EIP 7676, which was allowing address space expansion. Do we want to talk about testing or do we want to talk about spec first? There's a lot of things for spec that could consume the rest of the hour. Should we start with testing?
Yes.
Yeah. So testing. Dimitri and Hugo and Mario, you're from the testing team, right? The three of you? Or is Hugo Epsilon? I can't remember.
Yeah, Dimitri and myself.
Okay. How's the testing on EOF? Do you have any updates, any requests, any blockers?
Check up the group chat. I just posted a link to the PR.
Okay. Let me get my browser window ready so we can share this. Let's share screen. All right. So this is called EVM. So is it this one or am I on the right? Is this the correct one you posted or is there another one I should be showing?
Yeah, yes, this one. So this is basically the same logic as retested was using. When you fill in .py script, it will generate fixtures and it will check against the exceptions, error codes provided by EVM1 EOF parse tool.
Okay. So is this parsing the validation tests or all the tests? EOF parse. This is just doing the EOF parse tests.
Only EOF parse.
Okay. Cool. So this is something clients would need to implement EVM1's interfaces, or is this just relying on EVM1?
It currently works with EVM1, and in the future we integrate other parsers as well.
Okay.
And yeah, so since it's a Python, whenever you develop the test, you might need another exception, and you just add that exception in Python enums as you go.
Okay.
And like, if you need any help, how this all works, just ping me and we can work through it. So I can teach how to use a PyScript now compared to the JSON test we used to have.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got it. I think I'm starting to understand the Pi scripts for these. I've got tests for the data load operations and some tests that I submitted for 7676 in draft that I need to update some of the do some reviewer comments on.
In this pull request, there is an example test script file where you can see how the test is designed, and to generate it, you use the same fill command as with any other PyScript test. But
Okay.
yeah, it will require to have EOF parse executable installed in the path of the system to verify the exception and other than that.
Okay.
Yeah, Python script allows quite flexible way of designing your code. You can create quite sophisticated scripts, but not necessarily. Like, you don't have to. It's better when the test is readable and small and simple. But it allows us to do many things.
Cool. Epsilon, you have your hand up?
Yeah, this EOF parse, it's a tool that we did like for this older version when we were fuzzing EOF validation. I think that was running by Martin Svende. And I couldn't actually find what the spec was exactly. I think we communicated mostly on Discord and stuff. And I think many other projects actually implemented the similar tool. I know Dimitri has some issues with like the user experience of that because it really follows like very specific kind of way of accepting inputs. I guess we can change that because the old fuzzer, I think it's not operational right now. Or maybe we should kind of make it operational again. I think there's some discussion here.
Yeah, I think we should definitely make it operational again at one point. And I think the original way is to accept stuff from standard in, right?
Yeah, it follows exactly this. I just couldn't find where the fuzzer actually was. It was part of Go EVM Lab or something else. I don't remember actually.
Martin had written it. He would know. Okay. So that's comforting to hear. It's using the interface that we probably already have squirreled away somewhere.
Yeah, this
Cool.
kind of use the same one, and that's why it's a bit like rough in some cases, because sometimes it doesn't report anything because it just waits for the input. So, but I think if Dimitri made it work somehow, I think it's a good starting point for now.
Okay.
So, I wrote, like, I extended our version of this tool to help just, like, you can also pass in hex, or you can pass in a file name or a name to a folder, and it will run all of the tests in the folder. So the Geth EVM tool, or it's called EOF dump now, supports like 4 different ways of running tests, basically. Yeah, I don't know if other clients would want to implement this. Same thing for convenience.
Yeah,
Anyway.
we can implement the same. Just like I think it would be nice to have some like like graph specification what exactly is expected. I can obviously copy your code. I mean your kind of convention, but do you think it's enough to just like I just wonder like if how we can evolve it later. Like if we want to change something, how to communicate the change. And so for example, we can change something in the command line interface, but then maybe the execution spec test will be surprised about this and
Right.
I think it would be best to write down some spec for it.
Okay. I think one thing we're gonna want is definitely a batch mode, because even get's gonna hit the startup penalty because it's a really quick function. So it'll be much more efficient to do it in batch.
That I think that's kind of what the standard in stuff was.
Yep. Yep. That solves that quite easily.
One thing that I've kind of noticed is in our Shanghai version, we actually verified the errors. Now, because it's broken, we only verify that that there is an error. Is there some spec for the error numbers?
No, there is no spec for the error numbers. What matters is that it passes or fails. And that's where it gets kind of tricky. Where like if you submit a test with two separate errors, you're saying which error you have to test for first, which provides some restriction on the implementations. So that's one of my concerns with specifying a specific error. But the error could be informative in saying, I'm trying to trip this problem. And it could help us write better tests so that only that error trips. Because I remember it was the BN128. Besu had a bug where there was one test case that tripped two errors, and there was one case that only tripped one of those errors, and the second error was hidden by that. So there was no test case that tripped only the grouping error. So that's why we want test cases that fail one way invariably.
Yeah, and I kind of have the feeling that some of the errors that or some of the tests that I'm passing is because there are two errors being thrown. One of them is the correct one.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
And apparently at some point there were error codes specified.
Okay.
But maybe not anymore.
So as we do testing, we could probably build these error codes organically through testing.
So we have a list of exceptions for EOF. Maybe we can make that the canonical list, a list for testing. I can share the link to the file, and we can grow it as needed. So if you see that file that I sent just in the chat, at the bottom we have EOF exceptions, and maybe we can use this as the guideline.
Okay. And would we need to emit those exceptions or have some sort of mapping from our output to say this is the exception? How's that being handled in test?
So the exception is being written into the EOF test fixture format.
Okay.
In a string. So it has no number. What you would expect is if you scroll a little bit down to the bottom, there you go. So you have the class EOF exception. So what you will see is EOF exception dot and the name of the exception. So we have default exception right now because some exceptions are not mapped yet, but ideally we shouldn't have something like default exception. We should have a specific exception for every single test. And yeah, ideally, no test should fail with two different exceptions. If it's almost always possible to make to design the test so that it only hits one exception. There are very rare cases where it's impossible. Maybe if we find one of those, then we can decide what to do. But I think we should try to design every single test case so it is only possible to hit one exception.
Okay. There's no flag for fork version yet because it's all in one fork, so we can skate around that for a little bit. Okay. Any other testing? Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, we can version the exceptions also. If you guys want, we can. So we have this folder where we are storing everything that is related to version number 1. Maybe we can just create the exceptions there, and if there's when there's a version 2, we can just create another list of exceptions if necessary. But yeah.
Okay.
Also, to respond to Marius, it doesn't have to be a string. We can just easily change this to integer errors. The names are only for
Readability.
are only just to easily identify whichever exception it is.
Okay. One question I have, are there any places where there are holes in tests where you might appreciate help from the client teams implementing some of these tests or informing what tests need to be done?
I don't have a concrete answer to that because I haven't looked at the spec changes, to be honest. I don't know if Dimitri has any info, but I think we will be able to maybe find more coverage issues the more we implement the stuff, because right now, yes, it's very early to tell.
Okay. Ypsilon's got a hand raised?
Yeah. I sent one pull request, kind of like testing how to write tests to execution spec tests, and I just think need some guidance. What are the next steps? I think the current status is, so I picked like swap and dupe n as an example. I think the current issue for the pull request is just it doesn't it doesn't pass all of the Python linter requirements. Not sure I should fix these or like, yeah, it would be nice if you can take a look and give me some like feedback. It doesn't have to be right now, but and if that process kind of improves, I'm happy to contribute more tests. I'm not sure that's expected. Maybe you want to like have it fully under your control, but definitely we can put some resources into this.
Yeah, I can take a look. So I can see your PR. So back to question for Dano, do you need a review on 522, which is the tests for EIP 7676? If so, I can try to do both of them today.
Dimitri put a review on it. I mean, if you want to give a second review, I was gonna his changes sounded reasonable, so I'll go ahead and implement those. Both basically readability recommendations. But I was able to get it past the linter.
Sounds good.
Okay. Any other tests, questions, comments before we move on from the test subject? All right, let's go through some of these spec issues. I'll go through them in order unless there's an objection. Discuss version without a regular state change. I think this is one we had discussed last week, and this is the changes I think it is, where we would take out the creator contract and replace it with the creation transaction semantics, where we just combine the call data is the EOF container and the call data. Is that in here? This is just getting rid of the legacy create. So the first one is getting rid of the ISC portion. Any concerns? Can we go ahead and move to finalize that? Okay, hearing no objection, and it's been out for a week.
Version and can share the IP and
Yeah, we've published an AIP like with the same spec basically that is in this PR. This is a PR to mega spec, and separately there is an AIP now
Okay.
left. And yeah, this is the same idea of putting both container and call data. It's call data into data of the transaction. Here is, yeah, this one.
Okay. And this coalesces all of the changes we discussed in it.
It's yeah, it would be good to review, but basically, yeah, I think it's what we discussed mostly. We also discussed within the team another option of putting the constructor arguments into a data section instead. But yeah, given that in this version, the tooling wouldn't need to change and can be used as is to deploy EOF. And another concern that we had is forward compatibility with possible future special transaction type that will have like separate field for call data, and then constructor arguments definitely go into call data in those init code executions. And then so what we have now should also be similar, like so take constructor arguments from call data, not from data section. So those are two arguments in favor of doing this concatenation into in transaction data.
well, there's one more that in this version, the init code and non-init code has the same semantics. In the version where it would be concatenated and considered part of data, then the compilers would need to know that they are in init code compilation context and then behave slightly differently, aka get the constructor arguments from data as opposed to from call data. So I think these were like the strongest arguments in favor of the version we propose in the new EIP.
Okay, just a second. I need to go deal with the plumber real quick. Any other questions or concerns? I'll have my headphones on. Sorry about that. I'm back. So what was the opinion of the Epsilon team? Is this okay to move forward, or do we need to take more consideration of the alternatives?
I think the big alternative is just to introduce, because what it kind of decouples the new transaction type from all of this. So like the big alternative is to actually have the new transaction type, and then you can nicely split these two buffers, like init code container goes one way and the call data goes into other place. And yeah, I think that we can. So it's mostly, I think the main decision point is do we skip this new transaction type in the first deployment of EOF or not? And if we do, this is the solution to how to deploy the contracts. without new transaction type.
Okay. So from a practicality perspective, I think skipping the transaction type as a requirement will help get EOF over the line. It's already big, and we need to look at things to cut and make things work within the existing system. So that's just my opinion on it. We can always come back later and add the extra transaction type. And I think this solution, as far as working with a new transaction type, isn't too much overhead to support. And it might be good enough that we might not need the transaction type until we support things like TX create, where we need to allow smart contract wallets to create arbitrary contracts. But until we settle on a account abstraction format that's going to be brought into the protocol, I think we actually need to wait until it's decided to see what that looks like before we get too committed to a specific solution with a new transaction type. I mean, I kind of want to go forward with this as is, but if Epsilon still has concerns, we should probably discuss it for another while, make sure that we're okay with it.
No, I don't think so. I mean, like, my opinion is kind of also slightly into kind of like delaying this new transaction type together with TX create, right? So it's kind of a pack that goes together, and they mostly depend on each other. And having these new transaction types enables kind of also nicer solution to this. And I think we can kind of swap these solutions later as well, in the sense
Okay.
that we duplicate this kind of hacky concatenation with the kind of nicer form. But I'm not sure that the others from the team agree, but I think that was more or less the also like sentiment on our side.
Okay. So since this is a new EIP, doesn't even have a number, I don't think we can finalize it, but let's put it on the schedule again for next week for bring up your concerns, and let's try and get a decision on this next week. We definitely need a decision before our meeting in the middle of May. So
just to quickly confirm on that, the version with the concatenation is also easier for us.
okay. All right.
But does it enable the decision about the TX create and new transaction type? I mean,
So what allows us,
we can do at least like pull request to the spec with the updates like this. Do you think it makes sense to take?
yeah, like we could. So is the mega spec the canonical spec now, or is it the EIPs?
Sorry, we kind of we're talking time.
Is the mega spec the canonical spec, or is it the EIPs at this point? At what point do we switch over to the EIPs being a greater source of truth than the mega spec?
I think mega spec is still the main spec for now, but we haven't merged this particular change yet, and TX create
Okay.
is, so this is going to be updated, I guess, soon.
Okay, so I guess we could merge it in the mega spec if people are okay with that being canonical. But that also opened up other questions. Does this open up removing TX create from the current mega spec and the TX create init code transaction? Is that something we can move forward with these changes? Is that, or something we should work on? Marius prefers mega spec, so let's work with mega spec being canonical, and EIPs are artifacts we create to implement the changes. So that's what you would prefer, Marius?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll go with the mega spec being canonical and pulling out EIPs as we finalize stuff. So I guess we can go ahead and merge, because we discussed 7.8 last week. There are concerns that are noted, but I think for expediency, we should probably move forward with that. That also unlocks EOF version without TX create and a init code transaction. Again, the concerns with how we would do smart contract wallets are noted, and those are probably best solved when we get the AA solution that we're going to put in the protocol. Okay. The next on the list was init code mode and require validation of return contract. And this, I think, will solve some of the test case problems that Marius might have run into with truncated init codes. This would require us to make sure that we have return or stops in non-init code mode, and we have return contract in init code mode for each section, which shouldn't be too difficult to change from what we have. And the biggest value add here is when we have EOF create or return contract create point to a subcontainer. That's when we can do the size checks. And I don't think that's coded in here.
What size checks?
So return contract can have truncated data. EOF create cannot. So that might be one thing we might want to add to 86.
Yeah. By the way, one thing, this should all be up to date with the latest reviews. One thing that I didn't say in the spec, but it's kind of a maybe implementation detail that people worry about is that I think one concern is that it forces a dependency between code and what is this, container validation. But there actually isn't. Like, you can decouple the validation. You just have while you're doing container validation, you do basically while you're doing each of code and container validation, you create lists of init code containers. You assign flags to every single container, and then at the end, when you've done all of it, then you just check that those two match, and that should be very cheap.
Yeah, that was my assessment of it too. It can still be done linearly in order. It's just a question of how you store the data.
Yeah, I mean, it can be out of order actually. There's no strict dependency between the two.
Right. There's lots of flexibility. Okay, so that was stuff we were asked to review. Any concerns, comments, or should we go ahead and move forward with this change with the caveat on the data truncation validation? Okay, we discussed it last week. No objections were raised, so I think we should move forward with it. Go ahead and get that one merged when we get the fixes. Return data zero padding, and this is the return data load, return data copy operations within EOF. This is a request from the compiler teams. This is pretty common in conferences to say that these will bounce check is the only opcode that'll bounce check. So any comments on this, or should we move forward and write tests to verify it? This is one that will absolutely need tests to verify the behavior. Is like a early feature of it.
One drawback that Piotr found or brought up is that it's like the only opcode which changes behavior in EOF. The others are all like new opcodes, and then we deprecate the old opcodes.
EIP 7676 also proposes a change to balance for address-based extension. Rather than trimming, it will fail. So there's another one that's gaining it as well. There are two that will just change behaviors in the way they handle exceptions.
Yeah, based on that notion, our conclusion yesterday was that when the semantics are changed in this manner, we should probably prefer to have a brand new instruction, a brand new opcode for it.
Okay.
One analogous thing I noticed is in I don't remember when this was, Paris maybe, is difficulty got changed to some hash, right?
Pre-Brandau.
Yeah. And that's like a hash instead of a number, and it has some like It's like still a single stack item, but it has like some different characteristics. Like it'll take the full 32 bytes instead of, you know, just a few bytes.
I think in this case it doesn't really affect EVM. So EVM just gets this like 32 bytes of data under the same kind of like field in the transaction it gets in. At least like from my perspective. So it just this instruction just asks it to take this 32 bytes from somewhere.
Okay.
So it didn't have any
So
exceptional behavior.
yeah, the semantic is mostly take this 32 bytes, whatever it means, and put it on the stack. So I think it's slightly. I mean, yeah, we can argue that's like depending
Okay.
on the level when you put a boundary on EVM or stuff. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not the same. It was just the kind of like the closest analogy I could find.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think
This one as a kind of example, but I think it's slightly different.
But for
with the difficulty, I think the thing that pushed that over the edge is there were contracts depending upon the behavior that there was random data coming in, not really random data, but unpredictable data that is being used to see PRNGs for lotto contracts. So because it crossed layers, I think that's what pushed it over the edge of changing the behavior to be a report on a different one.
Yes. Also, otherwise you would get like null value for this opcode after the merge, right? So that's also, I think it's even worse that, so it kind of fixes some issue with the transition to proof of stake.
Okay.
there was one
So that's-
more. There was one more argument for the balance. It's a slight argument using a new opcode for it. Together with the code 2.0, balance is the only other opcode in EOF which does external account handling. And if it also gets a new opcode, then it can be grouped with the call opcodes. And it would be easy to check if a contract is handling external accounts or not, with a simple range, as opposed to looking at random opcodes. But this isn't like a strong argument.
Right. So that is a good objection to 90. I don't think we can go ahead and close with that. I think that's a valid argument. So if we really need this behavior, we would need to have new opcodes, and it will make the compiler's logic simpler because they can just reuse their existing return data copy and return data load checks. Return data load's new in EOF. Do we want to have that zero padded, or do we want to have it match return data copies behavior?
Currently, it is zero padded already.
Okay, so they'll be different between the two of them, but it's a new opcode.
No, it's not zero padded already.
Oh, it's not zero padded?
Yeah, it does. Right now, it does the same thing as return data copy, which is like the argument is by analogy. And by the way, I mean, personally, I think it's like fine actually to like change opcodes. Like when you're emitting EOF, it's not like you will accidentally issue the wrong, because like the semantics of all the instructions are different. So you like just need to make sure that the code gen is different for everything.
I mean, we already established a year ago that no compiler relies on the weird behavior of return getter copy anyway. So changing it in that regard has zero effect. So I also think that changing its behavior in place without a new opcode is the saner choice.
I mean, compilers may not rely on it, but other contracts may.
Yeah, other contracts need to be aware of EOF anyways.
Yeah, like EOF is like all the opcodes are new, and it's just like some of them happen to have the same meaning as before.
But when it comes to return data copy, I do kind of hear Epsilon's argument because it's just a subtle spec change. It's not like we're changing the full nature of it, which I think is easier to see that you're getting right. And just a little subtle change like that, I could see tripping things up.
Yeah, that's more or less Because like from the implementation point of view, it doesn't make any difference. I mean, you can implement it whatever. It's the same stuff, and I think we'll make effort to test this properly. I think what we mean is that for anyone outside of kind of core development and stuff, it's at least if you have any kind of disassembly or tooling that just reads byte opcodes and try to analyze it, it will be kind of obvious that this is something new here with the new number and it's not the old one. So yeah, so that's mostly, I think, the argument. But I think we don't have issue with implementing it otherwise. But I understand, like, we want these both changes, right? We're just discussing how to exactly roll it out.
Yeah, I mean, if it is a new opcode, like what do we call it? Like return data copy.
Return data copy 2. Return data copy 0 because it's 0 pads.
But is the only issue that is the name, or?
Yeah, I mean, I just don't understand. Yeah, like, okay, like if you throw it into a disassembler, you're just
You
gonna
can
like.
call it the same. That's, you can assign the same mnemonic to the different output.
Isn't that just as confusing?
Nobody expects this behavior of return data copy anyway. So I think changing it either way doesn't have an effect. It's just a cleaner semantics that is better for optimization. That's the entire effect of it. So I don't think it's worthwhile to consider doing it separately or at the same opcode, and just doing it at the same opcode. Keeping the name is the simplest and obvious choice to do that.
So I don't think there's consensus on moving forward or canceling 90. So I think we should table it and discuss it next week so we can discuss the last 2 items on the list. And these relate to the cost of ext call. There was a chart put up by Team Epsilon earlier today in the chat. It showed there was a discrepancy between ext call and call having to do with 2300 being added or subtracted or removed. So was there a call for a change here on this?
I just made one.
If we want exactly the same behavior as legacy costs for this case, I think we need to change the spec by changing the constant we use, and yeah, I can propose to change, and maybe it will be a bit more obvious what's actually being changed exactly as a diff. Well, I think we want to be exactly the same, right? It doesn't really. I mean, these numbers are kind of arbitrary, so let's use the number we actually used in the legacy.
Okay. So the proposal will be to make these 2 numbers the same.
Yeah.
But these sections can be different, and that's okay.
Yeah, the other sections are different by design. And
okay. This one's different by accident. Let's fix the accident.
Yes.
Okay. So let's move to finalize that next week. There'll be a PR, I think number 95. We'll have it. And I think the other related issue, increase the calls min retained gas.
Yeah, this is kind of more arbitrary. Because I just noticed like the retained gas is like 5,000, right? So it's kind of on the edge of, sometimes you are able to update the storage with this, sometimes you're not, depending on like the condition of the storage, if it was accessed or not, and it kind of feels weird, but it's, I think, not a critical issue, but maybe people has some opinions about it, like what should be enabled with this or not. But we can keep it for later. It's kind of invitation to discussion, actually. So
okay, so no call for action on that. And this is a change from the 164th retention to like a newer number, 20,000. Yeah, let's discuss it over Discord. I don't think there's an action to move on next week. My concern is that's kind of a large gas number. For people that like to bring their gas estimate to be as close to in line with possible with what's actually going to be executed. this will cause some ergonomic issues, but we can discuss it later. Yeah, and I do like that it's being talked against something like we need to be able to perform this action, so that's why we need this number. So that if we have to change schedules in the future and we come back and have to redefine this number because a gas schedule change, whoever's changing it will have some benchmark to say, this is the space we were trying to preserve. Okay. We could define it as like maximum S store times 1.5. Okay. So to summarize, adopt 78, 76, and 86, table 90, and discuss 94, 95 next week. Again, I'd like to thank everyone who called in. I'd like to thank especially Solidity for calling in. It's been a while since we've seen you. It's great to see you again. Yeah, and we'll speak again next week. If you have issues or need help with testing, just bring it up in the EVM channel. Lots of people will help there.
Right. See ya.
Great. See you. Thanks.
Regarding next week, I think that's the 1st May is the day off in the most of the European countries, so maybe it's good to move it.
Okay, there's a European holiday. We'll discuss moving it in Discord then. There'll be at least 48 hours notice if we move it.
Okay.
So probably Tuesday. There's no other option.
Tuesday, fine to me. Yeah.
All right. We'll discuss moving it after ACD tomorrow. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
See ya. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.